everyone what weapons you want to use in Bleed 2. The long story is shortened down a little bit here. Gotta give that right now. Every single one of them. But that wouldn't make a good top 7 list now, would it? So instead of rating the weapons due to how good they are, because every single one of them have their usage, and each and every single use of each and single weapon is actually pretty solid, except for one little exception we gotta go into very early on this list. Every single thing is useful here. So instead of top 7 best Bleed 2 weapons, we are gonna do top 7 best Bleed 2 weapons. Or most useful Bleed 2 weapons. It's gonna be very hard to not use the word best for the rest of this video, but instead use usefulness, because it's very weird for me to do a list like this. But stay tuned as we go through the top 7 most useful weapons in Bleed 2. On spot number 7 we have the Outliner here, the only weapon that doesn't really have a very good use in the game, and that is the pistols. The pistols are going to shoot out a stream out of bullets that you are going to be able to target on enemies, so quickly dispose of them. The damage of this weapon is pretty solid. It's nothing really to write home about, but it's pretty much up there amongst the better weapons, I would say. It's very easy to hit stuff with it, and you can use an ability there to basically split it into two, having one gun in each hand shooting in 2 different directions, which is making you able to cover a lot of grounds. The reason why this weapon is on the number 7 spot of this list is because there are very few niches where you are gonna be using the dual gun mode of this weapon, and there is gonna be something on this list that is, for all intents and purposes except for that very rare fringe case, strictly better actually. So therefore this weapon is gonna be on the number 7 spot of most useful list, because there are very few uses of this weapon, if any at all. On number 6 spot of this list we find Katana. The Katana is a very solid defensive weapon that allows you to both destroy a lot of enemies nearby you, and also allows you to reflect bullets back upon enemies. It's a very solid weapon to use for its defense capacities, but also has some very good offensive capacities as well. It basically allows you to get through some heals and some reflects, but there are some other weapons that are doing that part better, and this weapon suffers from the other fate that it basically has one weapon that is generally speaking a little bit better than it, and basically does another thing of its things well, and like adds some more functionality. So it's very rough to put this low, but I would say that the Katana is definitely not gonna get much higher than number 6 spot of this list, due to the fact that anything it does, there is something else that likely does it better. On the number 5 spot of this list we find probably the hardest weapon to put on this list at all, because this weapon is very special, and it's the chainsaw. On number 5 spot we have the chainsaw. This was a very rough weapon to position on this list, because in theory it is probably the weapon that has the most damage output out of any single weapon in this game. And as such it feels very bad to put this low on this list. But at the same time this is about how useful a weapon is, and just because this weapon is in theory a very strong weapon, it doesn't remove the fact that for most intents and purposes when people are actually playing this game, this is probably the weapon they will have the least usage of. And the reason for that is because to get the full mileage out of the chainsaw you have to be very close to the enemy. Like extremely close to the enemy. And the hitbox for chainsaw is also pretty small as well, in difference to the Katana, so it's an extreme close range weapon, which makes it extremely hard to use. There are only a couple of fights in the entire game where it's pretty realistic to basically be able to stand very close to the enemy for the entire fight to be able to use this item to its fullest. It's very hard for me to put it this low, but I can't put the chainsaw any higher of this because of its usefulness is pretty limited. It's definitely getting better the more skilled a player is, and I'm not gonna lie, top players can use this weapon pretty successfully in a couple of fights on some difficult levels, but generally speaking this is probably the weapon people are using the least, except for the other 2 previous entries. that are not really used because of another entry that I come up to in the future of this list. On spot number 4 we find the rocket launcher. The rocket launcher is a weapon you are not going to use a lot for its damage. You are not going to use it to hit most enemies. You are not going to use it as your primary damage dealer in a lot of fights at all. What you are going to use this weapon for is for its capacity to basically disable a lot of boss mechanics. Basically making it into a free win if you use this weapon. This weapon is very rarely used. It's basically 4, 5. There are some fights where you use it. It's a lot of fights where you use it. But outside of those fights you never use it. But in the fights you use it. In the boss fights you use it. This weapon is bringing you the free win in very short time. So this weapon definitely deserves to be on the number 4 spot of this list because of that reason alone. We are now reaching the top 3 of this list, and from this point on every single weapon here is going to be used in most fights. They are going to be used in most fights or in most circumstances. And this spot is dedicated to the laser rifle. The laser rifle is a very rough to use item, but it's very strong when you use it. The general idea with this weapon is that you use it at the start of the fight with a blast to basically deal a lot of initial damage on the enemy. And by doing this, you are off in a very good position at the very start of the fight, having a lot of damage done for free initially, which is very powerful. However, where this weapon is really shining is in a couple of fights where you can basically stand and spam that attack for the entire fight. But even outside of that, this weapon is amazing, and that is why it is reaching the number 3 spot of this list. There is no reason to not use this weapon in basically every fight, because the damage is just so good. On the number 2 spot of this list, well, this was a very hard one to decide on. The number 2 and number 1 was very close to one another, but number 2 has to go to white. The reason for this is because white is simply only an offensive weapon, and it's very limited to be useful in boss fights. What do I mean by this? Well, white is a weapon that is basically very high power. It deals a lot of damage, very much damage. But how much damage it does depends on how well the player is doing. And what decides how well the player is doing? Well, it's a little meter at the top of the screen that basically shows your current rank, and if you want white to be a very good weapon, it has to be either A or S. If the style is either A or S, this weapon is gonna do a lot of damage. If it's lower than that, it's basically gonna be like the guns or below. But while on A or S, this weapon deals a lot of damage, and as long as you don't get hit, you are going to maintain that high damage. So how strong this weapon is really depends on the player. But most people should be able to pretty consistently be able to get up to an A or occasionally an S, which means that this weapon is going to be very strong during those circumstances. And I can't really see any point in which I wouldn't want to have this weapon on my weapon bar. This weapon is simply just so good for boss fights. There is nothing really that competes with it from a general usefulness in boss fights. So this weapon gains the number 2 spot with flying colors. The number 1 spot of this list, unsurprisingly, considering it's the only one standing, Katana plus Pistols combo. Remember how I previously in the list stated that the bottom 2 spots were basically given bottom 2 spots of this list because of one specific weapon existing? This is that weapon. This is the weapon that combines some of the most powerful aspects of both the katana and the pistols into one weapon. This weapon is capable of reflecting bullets, and it's also delivering a very good stream of damage in a very acute line at a very good distance, which basically makes this a very good offensive weapon, as it is allowed to from a distance clean out your target, while you can pretty easily deflect any bullets of the same color as your hair if you're playing as Rin or rival back upon the enemy. This means that this is a very useful weapon, And it's also very good in boss fights as well, due to the fact that many bosses has a lot of mechanics that use out-colored bullets. Which means that this weapon is potentially, oftentimes, actually a little bit more better damage than the white during short bursts. And it's also a very good weapon to rebuild style, as the reflex is giving you a lot of style for free. Which means that this weapon is basically complementing the white in a very good way in boss fights. This is basically the most useful weapon in the game. It's very good both outside and inside of boss fights. There is really no other item that could gain the top spot on a list like this. That was my top 7 list of the most useful weapons in Bleed 2. Please everyone, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below and tell me where you disagree or disagree with me. I also always love, as always, to hear people disagreeing with me and agreeing with me. Yeah, it's very good to have an open discussion about this kind of things. So yeah, feel free to join in the comment section below to leave your thoughts on this list and see if I was wrong. Also feel free to leave a little like on the like bar, and also feel free to press the beautiful little subscription button to subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you next time.